I think this is an amazing film and really interesting. I think it's politically bullshit.
Oh, yes, of course, because there's a bunch of closed-minded racist morons that represent people in the seats of power.
So this is part of that conversation of like the imagined American working class that we've been doing for decades now.
These are Bollywood musicals. They just don't have dance numbers because Hollywood doesn't have the balls to just, put in a dance number. And if you can direct an action sequence, you can direct a dance sequence.
It's 5 fucking stars. It's absolutely unbelievably beautiful and amazing. And it is total propaganda for the Cuban Revolution. I don't think anymore that you can avoid fighting inside and outside of the state at the same time. I think there may be multiple ways to do that. I don't think electoral politics is the only way to do that.
Yeah, but some shit's got to get burned down too, so...
Right.
Honestly, it kind of warms my heart that somebody out there was thinking that the Watermelon Woman was a threat to like white, hetero, cis Christian culture.
I know we're saying that this isn't technically like a good movie, but a movie with surprisingly good elements and a really fucked up package.
This ending, you have good characters that are entirely powerless against the unstoppable evil capitalists.
Mm-hmm. Only after Avengers did Marvel movies start doing as well as Ghost.
Right.
Starring Patrick Swayze, Demi Moore, and some very phallic clay.
Did the word pornography ever enter your mind when you were watching this film, Isaac?
Nope.
And I think it has the politics of cinema stamp of approval. If you want to use this as a first date movie, go for it.
It seemed to have worked out for my folks. Fuck capitalism. Fuck all of this stuff.
Welcome all to the politics of cinema. On this show, we believe films are never neutral. There's a political as well as an artistic message captured in every film, in every country, and in every time period. We are on the lookout for all of it. My name is Aaron Spears.
And my name is Isaac Miller. And on this episode, we are kicking off our sort of what has become sort of traditional Black History Month, though actually it's not usually a month. Well, actually last year it wasn't a month, and this year it will probably be more than a month, in which we look at sort of, we look at Black cinema, auteurs of Black cinema, usually specifically. It's interesting. I mean, obviously this is not the only time of the year that we deal with Black auteurs and films by Black creators, but we try to focus a little more in on that. And we sort of follow some threads that we've been following over the years since the beginning of the podcast and before. So on this episode, we're doing Ivan Dixon's The Spook Who Sat by the Door from 1973. And Ivan Dixon is a favorite of the podcast, in part because of covering Nothing But a Man by Eric Romer. Michael Romer. By Nothing But a Man by Michael Romer.
Although Eric Romer's Nothing But a Man would have been an interesting experiment to see.
I do it every time with them. It's bad.
Well, it's too generic. Michael, Eric, like Mike or Eric, like it could be more just kind of
names.
Yeah. But then Romer only, like Michael Romer not being a very known filmmaker, I would say doesn't just roll right off the tongue the way Eric Romer does.
He's known here. We've done half of his filmography and we will finish it. We're gonna make it through. I think, what is it? I Live with Fear, and I think there's another one.
Yeah, I think there's only 2 more left. But it's also kind of interesting to do Spook Who Sat by the Door from 73 because we have been appreciative of Ivan Dixon in front of the camera. Now we get to see what he's going to be doing behind the camera specifically, which also to me begged the question too, because he's known as an actor. I forget the character on Hogan's Heroes, but he, it was like, I guess his claim to general fame out there in the collective TV and movie watching world would be a role on Hogan's Heroes, which I never saw, so that's not ringing any bells to me. But why is he not acting in his movie? I did not, in looking into the production elements of it, I didn't get a good answer to that, because like, you're a known actor, you're a guy from TV at this point. It seems like maybe that would open up doors as far as like maybe financing or some distribution could go. I don't know.
Maybe not. I mean, like, and part of it is, I mean, he does a bunch of TV movies after the early 70s, which I'm going to check out as time goes on. But he has 2 features as far as I know. Maybe I've got this wrong. And the other one is Trouble Man, which is quite good. Also on YouTube in high quality.
Does he act in that one though? I haven't seen that one.
As far as I don't believe he does. He's certainly not the lead. No, I don't remember. Okay. It's been a while since I've seen it. I meant to rewatch it and I didn't get a chance. No, I don't think he does. And that's, you know, that sort of looks like a Shaft ripoff, but it's not. It's another one of these movies where, like, technically you consider it blaxploitation, but, like, is it? You know,
Right, right.
it's like it's got all the trappings, but, like, you know, it's, you know, it's actually, it's a good crime thriller with some of those elements in it, and it really shouldn't just be categorized as a Shaft ripoff. But then after that, he doesn't really direct anymore. But it's like these are two very strongly directed movies,
Well,
right?
direct films anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, he goes through, I wrote these down. He directed episodes of The Waltons, Rockford Files, Bionic Woman, Magnum PI, and A-Team. He had quite a television directing career
Okay.
after this, but I don't really know what his intent was. Like, was he trying to have an entirely just film career? Was he, I don't know, maybe he was comfortable just like settling in and just doing some TV directing, paying some bills, do whatever he wants to do with that.
So he has a directing career afterwards. Okay,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but
And I
it's
did
not.
check. He's not listed in the cast for Trouble Man, so it does seem like when he's directing,
He's
I'm
directing.
directing, producing, writing, whatever. But yeah, it's behind the camera time for the Spook Who Sat by the Door.
I mean, part of it is we've covered his sort of last feature film, I think, that he acts in, which is Car Wash. Is that his last?
I think he pops up in a couple more, but I mean that's the last, like, I was gonna say Big Splash. Is that a car wash metaphor?
It's
I don't know.
it's his last substantive role. And I
Yeah.
remember us thinking, you know, watching him act with a young Bill Duke, that this is sort of like handing off a baton in terms of sort of this both acting and directing,
Hmm.
and sort of the ambitions involved, right? I mean,
Right, right. And it's also interesting thinking of the young Bill Duke character in Car Wash is like the guy with revolutionary hopes, or some thoughts, and that's going to definitely play a part in this particular movie, in the Spook Who Sat by the Door as well. Also, I pulled a Bill Duke quote we can use a little bit later on here, because I thought if Bill Duke has something to say in a movie and it's a movie we're covering, we're going to hear what Bill Duke has to say
yes, exactly.
about that. Should we start with a synopsis first, Isaac, or should we start with some commentary on the title of this movie?
Let's start with a synopsis
Okay.
and then move from there. So, The Spook Who Sat by the Door basically starts with the U.S. congressman in basically covering a district in Chicago, in Illinois, realizing with a black media consultant in the room, right, that the computers are saying at this point that he is losing the black vote, and he has to figure out an angle to get them back.
What is our image, Willa?
We've programmed the latest polls, Senator. Lewis Harris gave us a random pattern sampling with peer group anchorage. Gallup, a saturation vertical syndrome study with horizontal personality backstopping. And NORC ran an ethnic study with racial and religious breakdown, status group compensation, and socioeconomic balancing.
Yes, good. But am I winning or losing?
Losing, Senator.
Losing. But why? The computers had me ahead last December.
It checks out on both computers, plus the one we have as a safety valve backstopping crosscheck. If the elections were held today, you would lose by 1.846 percentile.
1.846 percentile. Oh, yes. The computers don't lie.
Isn't there a possible breakthrough with any of the peer groups? How are we doing on the Jewish vote?
The senator's solid with the Jews, Mrs. Hennington. The Negroes are the trouble spot.
The Negroes. I'm the best friend those people have in Washington.
The computers indicate a sharp decline immediately after your law and order speech last winter.
So they decide that the best way to build up the black vote again is to put pressure on the CIA to desegregate, because there are no black CIA, like fully trained agents, which does seem like a failure for an intelligence agency.
All right, all right. Now, let's see if we can come up with some ideas here. First, how do we retrieve the lost black vote?
Gil, why don't we accuse the CIA? of a racially discriminatory hiring policy. They have no Negroes, except on a menial level, you know.
Certain, Belinda. I mean, that may be it.
I'm positive, but I'll check it out with our man over at personnel.
Good.
Whoever they select will be the best-known spy since 007.
But I also love how, like, it's the CIA they can shift some blame to in, early 70s. Like, let's just blame the CIA and shift the attention this way.
I mean, it makes, and this is a point, peak anti-war movement at this point, dirty tricks, the whole thing. I mean,
a lot of that stuff is presumed, I guess, because like COINTELPRO isn't like a known thing to the public yet.
Right.
But there's plenty of people within activist communities of all sorts. So it'd be like, CIA's fucking, somebody's up to something here.
Right. So what they do is they bring in a crop, the CIA brings in a crop of black candidates who are basically figuring that some of them are going to make it as tokens. And they actually lay out the theory of sort of tokenization, right? Which is, which is something that is important, I think, throughout the whole film, is nascent black elites allowed into white institutions or institutions created by white people to sort of, in a way, control the black population or be representative or be an escape valve.
Which we should also mention is part of, we should mention too, is part of like the name of the movie. Like in the racial slur version of it is like, I think they even mentioned in the movie at one point, like, well, put him at the front desk, put him right by the front door so everybody will see the CIA is, integrated.
Right.
So one angle of the title there.
So that's one angle of the title. This is the double meaning. This is a double meaning title. So basically, what we're introduced to Dan Freeman, who stays really cool throughout, right? He stays subservient, and only a few of them a few of the white CIA agents start to realize that there's more going on here. He's unusually good at martial arts. He excels at everything, both intellectually and physically. And we see him in his romantic life. His relationship ends with his longtime girlfriend, who's sort of moving up in the world and gets married. And he has a relationship with a black prostitute who sort of gives us a window into that this is actually someone who other people are intimidated by, that he's somebody that you don't mess with, though you don't see why. And I just want to say very early, Lawrence Cook's acting as Dan Freeman is absolutely astounding. Just the use of his face and the subtlety. So but they learn tradecraft, but as we see with the FBI, I keep saying this, CIA head honchos, they don't actually intend to integrate if they don't have to.
Right.
So they knock off way more of them. And Freeman ends up as an agent, but he's only allowed basically to run the copying machine and then works as a personal front desk guy for, I think, that the head of the CIA. I can't remember the guy's level.
I paused the movie at this point because then when they said his title, Top Secret Reproduction Center Stations Chief, and I was like, wait, what was that? So I paused and rewound it. I was like, Top Secret Reproduction? Oh, copy machine.
Yeah, no, they put Freeman at the copy machine, and then he ends up being, because he knows how to be subservient, right? Knows how to. He becomes a top aide,
a tour guide.
A tour guide. Well, he does a tour guide once, but he's the front desk guy for like the head of the CIA. I think that's what he ends up being. Like he literally works the front desk.
Right. And I can remember if it was like the head of the CIA or just head of that station or whatever it was, because he's not like helping out. He's not like working with Hoover or anything. Oh wait, no, sorry, FBI. See, damn it.
See, I'm screwing it up. Okay.
Yeah, so he puts in just enough time at the CIA. He rises through the ranks. Clearly could be doing maybe something, but probably not. They're going to keep him as some sort of a token appointment, but then he has to leave.
Then he decides to go back to Chicago. Become like a highly paid social worker for some foundation, right? Which is where things are going. Like this is in some ways a movie set in the 60s because we're talking about the war on poverty.
Mm-hmm.
And, so it doesn't feel like a Nixon era movie, and in a certain sense, but also these are, if you go to Cleveland, the foundations are what controls funding today. There's these big foundations. They're like almost parastatal organizations, tied deeply to city council. And they're the ones that sort of co-opt any sort of community organizing in Cleveland into something that is, you need funding, whatever. And so he joins that complex. And then we find out what actually is going on, which is he's a former gang member. He went to college. He fought in the Korean War. And then he learned tradecraft, and he's come back to turn his former gang, which still exists, but they're all young people, right? He's probably in his 40s by this point, and basically turn them with the training that he's received into a guerrilla army to wage a war against the U.S. government for Black liberation, and then use that to create cells all throughout the country using the tradecraft that he's learned. And that is our basic premise. And by the end of the movie, the guerrilla war has started.
The tagline for this movie cracked me up. Their first mistake was letting him in. Their biggest mistake was letting him out. Kind of funny. But yeah, he also, when he gets back to Chicago officially as a social services worker, he meets up with this guy Dawson, who was a childhood friend of his, but who has now become a Chicago police officer. So
Right.
There is a setup here. There's a dynamic going on where they do officially meet and rekindle a friendship as a social worker and police officer. And then that's obviously going to come into a dramatic head because once, a police officer realizes that your friend and presumed social worker is actually getting a, guerrilla army cell network established in major cities across the country, that's not going to end well.
Well, part of it, this relationship, there's the relationship with his ex, who then it turns out that she's married to a gay man who's Black, which that plays into a scene that we'll clip. But basically, she can do whatever she wants, right? He goes and does his stuff. This is all for appearances. So he rekindles some relationship with her. They all knew each other back in the day. They come from the old neighborhood, and they've all sold out into the civil rights industrial complex building up around the war and poverty. That's what's referenced for him, and sort of other, the other one is, Dawson is both someone who feels deeply connected to the old neighborhood, really does seem to care, but, just got back from California doing a 15-week riot control seminar.
Right.
But it's a riot control seminar, but it also has to do with gangs. So part of it is the assumption is that riots have to do, with organized gangs in a way, right? There's a sort of understanding there. So, but their relationship is some of the most powerful stuff in the film, and I think they put a lot of emphasis on the difficulty. And one of the things is that Freeman has been playing the sellout this whole time. In college, he sounded incredibly militant. And Dawson points out, since when they went to college, probably would have been in the 50s by this point. It's before the Black Power movement, right? So he was a radical before, quote, that was trendy. That's what Dawson basically says.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's sort of basically, but even with just the move to the CIA, which takes 5 years, right? The movie says he's in there for 5 years. Right. But with that move, he's made it sound like he cares about money and that he's sort of sold out into these structures. That's his cover, because he's, it's Battle of Algiers, folks, right? It's that level.
Yeah. Which I thought of a few times while watching this movie, which kind of speaks to a question I had to start off also, which is genre. I have the audio from the trailer we'll play here in just a second, but what genre or genres would you place this movie in, Isaac?
It's a political satire at one level.
Okay, that's kind of the way I was going with it as well.
It's a political satire. In a sense, it's a spy movie. It's not, but it is. It's somewhat of a subversion of a spy movie.
Well, I was asking because when I looked
know.
up on Letterboxd and IMDb, it's listed as action, war, drama, crime.
Crime, no. The other two, sure.
Action, war, drama?
In a sense.
Yeah, I guess, right. It's guerrilla warfare, which you do kind of see a little bit.
We see guerrilla actions, and part of what is they're well composed, right? Like they're it's very intentional.
Oh yeah. One of the things that's going to come up with this movie and possibly some other stuff we're going to be covering for the next month or two here is this idea. This movie comes out. It's set just generally in like early 70s. Comes out in 73. this movie does in 73. And so you're in the era of a studio, in this case, I think it's United Artists, looking to distribute this movie to get a crowd in for it. Well, we have to make it look like it's a blaxploitation movie because that's the only way we know how to sell movies with, black stars, black directors, etc. We can't have more than one genre.
Right.
So keep that in mind as you listen to the trailer for Spook Who Sat by the Door.
Raise your right hand and repeat after me.
The Spook Who Sat by the Door, the controversial best-selling novel, now becomes a shocking screen reality. The story of the first black agent in the CIA.
Whoever they select will be the best-known spy since 007.
Their first mistake was letting him in.
And let me congratulate you on being the first Negro officer in the Central Intelligence Agency.
Their worst mistake was letting him out.
You really want to mess with Whitey? I can show you how.
For 5 years, he was their token Negro.
Freeman, you people must serve.
For 5 years, he kept his cool.
Man, you just don't belong. I think you'd be happier with a mop in your hands. Like your mama.
And in return, they taught him how to spy. How to fight. How to kill. For 5 years, he was the spook who sat by the door. And then he turned gangs of ghetto kids into a highly trained guerrilla army.
We live off the land. We match technology with spontaneity and improvisation. Men against machines, brains against computers. Now, if you don't think it can work, you check out Algeria, Kenya, Korea, and Iran. Can you dig it?
He turned a summer riot into a revolution.
This is not about hate white folks. It's about loving freedom enough to die or kill for it if necessary.
He turned the American dream into a nightmare. Yesterday, a novel. Today, a movie. The Spook Who Sat by the Door.
And the mayor's office is now air-conditioned, courtesy of the Black Freedom Fighters of Chicago.
We don't get any directed by Ivan Dixon voice credits on that trailer.
No, we don't.
But yeah, like it couldn't sound more like you got the funk score, which the movie does have.
Mm-hmm.
It's Herbie Hancock. It's that time period. It's great score. But that narrator, I mean, it's right out of like, Coffee, Shaft, any of the blaxploitation ones, like that deep, kind of Isaac Hayes knockoff kind of voiceover trailer guy voice. I mean, I guess they are mentioning kind of very front and center the Sam Greenlee book that it's based on. So, first it was a controversial book and now it's a controversial movie. But I don't know, I really didn't get a strong blaxploitation vibe watching this one.
No, I don't think it does. It deals with some of the themes, but takes them so much farther. I'll just say, I mean, Herbie Hancock's a jazz guy. That's part of what's interesting about it is that, I mean, yes, there's funk stuff in it, but like it's actually a jazz score.
Yeah, it's a little closer to Uptight.
Yeah.
Which is Booker T and the MGs doing, kind of a good, moody, jazzy score to it.
Right. And it's part of it is like, I mean, it's not really in the funk wave exactly. And then also, yeah, I mean, I think there's other themes actually shared with Nothing But a Man. This is a more fantastical film in a lot of ways, but it's dealing with similar sorts of political logics, especially at the end, and we can get into that. But yeah, no, I don't think it really, it's another one of these movies where like the blaxploitation wave may create space for things like this, but actually there's more going on here. And, maybe we need to expand our blaxploitation lens a little bit, but like, for one thing, this feels, I don't know what the budget is. It doesn't feel like and obviously, I mean, like Shaft looks good, right? Like, I mean, not all blaxploitation movies are like but it doesn't feel like a exploitation movie. It feels like it had enough of a budget and everything to do something. It's not like a huge movie, but like, you know, they can stage some guerrilla raids. They can, you know what I mean? And like, yes, the number of sets are pretty limited and things like that. But like, it just doesn't, I don't know. That might not be right, but it doesn't feel like it. It doesn't feel like it's shot like that.
It
It doesn't
doesn't
feel like
feel
it's
like it's
edited.
trying to hide a low budget.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Because like there's nothing where you're like, oh, I wish they would have shown that, or I wish that, like it does essentially what it needs to do visually. I did look up a little bit about the making of it. So there was no help at all. I guess they were trying to, because Sam Greenley's a Chicago guy, the author of the book, who's also screenwriter, co-screenwriter, and producer of the movie. So he's producing this and co-writing it and working really closely with Ivan Dixon. Greenley's a Chicago guy. It's all set in Chicago. Let's film in Chicago. Like they say it in the movie. It's all like takes place in Chicago. But, good old Mayor Daley was still in power at the time and was like, no, you're not filming in Chicago. So there was a refuser to like work with Chicago at all. So what they did was they went over across the state border to Gary, Indiana, and even got the Gary, Indiana Police Department to work with the production itself. Like there's some helicopter shots of the one riot, like downtown.
What
and
lies did they tell them?
they're using the police helicopter to film this scene. So yeah, I'd be kind of curious, like how was this fully explained to the Gary, Indiana police, or was it more just like, hey, it's like Riotsville, USA documentary or something where, like, oh no, it's this is just a scene where this happens, and then of course the cops win. So can we use your helicopter? But then there are clearly some exterior shots in Chicago. There's a scene where Freeman is with, I forget, I don't think it's with Pretty Willie, but he's with like one of his other, the guerrilla group is the Cobras. So he's with another member of the Cobras, and they're like on one of the elevated train platforms. Anything that you see that's clearly in Chicago, they said they just shot it guerrilla style. They, they grabbed the camera and they grabbed the actors, and they just went and shot like, okay, nobody's around. All right, shoot this scene real quick. Okay, let's shoot this scene real quick. So there's pretty clear exteriors in Chicago. They just did that guerrilla style.
Right. And I think that gives it so much more of an expansiveness. All right. So part of it is we are dealing with a movie at that level, but the effort going into it is not exploitation cheapy. Like the effort going into it is passion, and this is something we need to do.
Yeah. I think so.
I'd like to talk about the political themes, and then I'd like to talk about the different, basically everything is through Freeman. And then I'd like to talk about his different relationships. So the relationship, basically the way racism is portrayed,
sure,
his relationship with the gangs, and his relationship with Dawson. And I think there's a gender critique of this that could be made as well, which I think is sort of interesting. So politically, what is this movie trying to say? Part of the portrayal of in this movie is of a white power structure, which both is co-optive. We see this electorally. We see it with Freeman's job with the foundations, but also so profoundly arrogant and unreconstructed in its racism that it cannot see what Freeman is doing and the level of sophistication. And when they do see it, they assume it must be the Russians. So there's a level of arrogance, right? Which makes them unable to grasp what's happening or see it coming.
The next stage of your training program is to learn how to steal. Yes, sir. I know you're all experts in stealing from your black brothers and sisters. Now you will learn how to steal from the enemy. Remember, a black man with a mop, tray, or broom in his hand can go damn near anywhere in this country. And a smiling black man is invisible.
Right. Like basically, you can create these guerrilla cells as long as they're disciplined enough throughout the country. And I'm not saying this is like a realistic plan or that but like that's part of the analysis, right? The CIA has no idea what he actually is or what he's doing. And there's a few people who sort of pick up that in the CIA pick up early on that he's like not what he seems. They check him out. They decide to follow him, but they never actually figure out what he's doing because everything he does looks like his job in trying to help.
Right.
So like part of it is he's perfectly camouflaged. So you have this racism which is like at the same time fetishizes blackness, right? So the head of the CIA, who would never guess him or the head that he's dealing with, ends up in a long-term relationship with a black prostitute that Freeman had been with in LA. And, there's a relationship of dependence there, or there's a relationship of sort of fetishization of blackness and a dependence in that. And, represent is desire for blackness at the same time. And then there's a structural analysis, right? So part of it is you have this guerrilla plan inspired by national liberation movements around the world.
Recruitment and training group ready?
Had their final exams last week.
Transportation set?
They make 2 moves before they reach their final destination. Check for tails along the way. Pick up instructions as they go along.
Logistics?
There'll be $500 in new identification papers waiting for them when they reach the other end. After that, they live off the street.
And when they get there?
Locate and identify a gang like the Cobras. Set up training, a chain of command, organization, and a very tight discipline.
And?
No junk.
Good. I want the men assigned to Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Detroit, New Orleans, and Los Angeles to move out within 10 days.
Man, they got some bad brothers in New Orleans.
You got that right. And stagger the rest of them over the next month. There'll be monthly reports until they make contact and weekly reports after that. Now, if they get busted in a street hassle, they recruit in prison and we replace them. Any questions?
Which is also kind of interesting because this also speaks to CIA training. Clearly as well, like developing assets and being sent out. Also, no love for Cleveland. Come on.
Right.
Cleveland,
exactly.
Come on. We were ready to go.
But part of no, exactly. I mean, he's applying the CIA training, right? And he's applying probably experience that he got in the Army as well. But yeah, no, I mean, we see him using the techniques, right? And then making reference to guerrilla movements as well.
Right.
But part of it is also, there's the prostitute and this sort of level of sort of psychic dependence that the head has. And then when the CIA talks about putting down how we're going to put down this insurgency, right? This guerrilla uprising, and it's the first few days, right? It's clear now that that the National Guard can't handle it. They brought in regular troops, and the first thing they talk about basically is standard anti-guerrilla tactics, which is literally just putting all the black people in Chicago in a concentration camp. They talk about a couple other options, basically ethnic cleansing, concentration camps, or cordoning it off, and basically point out that none of these are actually possible. Basically because the city, the medical infrastructure, the sanitary infrastructure,
right,
the transportation infrastructure all depend on black labor. And
and also, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, you go. Yeah.
I was gonna say it speaks to that, but there's also another clip we have. There's a specific mention too of like there aren't the resources for those in power, the white structures of power, to actually control everything they're trying to do in the country. But also, let's not forget Vietnam is also going on, so they can't really control. They're just spread so thin.
Well, this is his argument on liberation, and I wanted to get to what we think his actual program is and how it relates to real world politics at some level. But part of his program is we launched this guerrilla war. We want freedom, right? In a vague sense. I think there's some mention of sort of nationness as well.
Yeah, specifically a nation.
Specifically a nation. So this is in a sense a separatist program, though it's not laid out in the film. But basically, he literally says that they can either police the U.S. can either police the world or hold down our insurgency, but they cannot do both, and they're going to have to choose. So they have to choose between empire or controlling us, which, in a certain sense, in the real world, is what the '50s civil rights movement had pushed on. Right?
Right.
this is the weakness of the American sort of ideology, because look at what they're doing here. And so, but it, it's very explicit in that, right?
Yeah.
Some of the boys is 1A for the draft, man. Now, what we gonna do if they get called? Go underground?
Yeah. If they can beat it, they should. But we recruit every non-vet we can get. Right now, I'm trying to recruit Dawson as a double agent.
Turk, you really think we can win?
In guerrilla warfare, the winning is in not losing. When you sleep on the floor, you can't fall out of bed.
Then what we trying to do, man?
Fight Whitey to a standstill. Force him to make a choice between the two things which he seems to dig most of all. There is no way that the United States can police the world and keep us on our ass too, unless we cooperate. When we revolt, we reduce it to a simple choice. Whitey finds out he can't make either.
Well, the Cobras is ready. What about the other brothers and sisters out there on the streets?
Their choice is when we start. If they don't follow our program and turn us into the cops, we lose in a week. But if they support us,
yeah,
then it's hit and run, harass and hound, and we can paralyze this country.
Yeah, right. Training done started already in 9 cities. 5 groups is combat ready. Plus us.
Right. And by next summer, we should be able to hit the 10 largest urban complexes in the United States.
She.
But yeah, it lays it out there. We're like, what are they going to do if they're forced to pick between the two? But I also like the added detail of they don't necessarily know city by city, like, is the community going to just turn them over to the cops? And then he says, then we're done. Or, the role of the general population is going to be once we kick it off, what are they going to do?
This is a very, like, is the prepared propaganda going to actually be effective or not?
Right.
And they have a propaganda message. So like, this is, functionally it's Black nationalist. He puts an emphasis on freedom. We don't necessarily have an economic program, but it obviously deals with poverty. And that's his background. He talks, one of the more powerful moments is him talking to one of the gang members who sort of ends up in leadership, who's passing, right? Like he's probably, he's probably mixed race, but deeply considers himself Black, right? And that he is not passing enough that, couldn't get out of it. But but this is somebody who's like sort of barely staying in college and doesn't really care about it as a status symbol. And he makes, basically Freeman talks about his grandmother helping to teach him how to read, but realizing that she actually did not know how to read, and that she was trying to learn to read along with him. And it's
right.
It's a very powerful moment of sort of getting at his underlying motivations. I mean, he's an interesting character, right? I mean, he's sort of this, in a sense, this sort of perfect figure, right? He's trained himself up in all of these different ways. He's educated, but also has street experience, right? I mean, he would, in a different movie, he would be, he's practically superhero material, right? Or he is the background of an ultimate spy, except for he's Black and, does not come from some sort of aristocratic or whatever background, right? A patrician background. He's not a WASP, which you would see.
That dual identity kind of superhero trope as well, where I'm one thing to the outside world, but underneath it, I'm really this thing, except that he's also applying his trade just like within the United States of America, rather than like going somewhere else to do it.
Which is, of course, a racial theme, right? Because he's living two different racial consciousnesses.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And one that white America expects him to have, and the other liberatory one.
But also how the duality that is so close, like you said, it never to the outside, white world, or even to Dawson, the cop, childhood friend who's now a cop. He's going through his daily steps of being like the quote unquote social worker, for the organization or whatever. it looks exactly like that's what he's doing. Meanwhile, what he's actually doing, with
Right.
when you take a closer look, is getting all these guerrillas trained and the cell structure set up.
Yeah. So like, I mean, it's interesting the portrayal of the whitest. I mean, obviously this is satirical, and it's playing on the stupidity of whiteness, and sort of the ways it's playing in a sense on the ways that Black people historically, in moments in which they did not have enough power to openly resist, have to play this sort of step and fetch it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a new step and fetch it. But it's, I mean, in the CIA scenes, it's barely not, right. Like it is. They they play on the pantomime that you have to play to coddle white people, and then that there's another world of sort of Black struggle. And there's actually a scene where him and some of the gang members laugh by playing out something from an old race movie, right? By playing out a scene, and they're
Oh, yeah,
chuckling
yeah.
together. So that that duality is really important, and is sort of what is being struggled in, and sort of struggled in between him and Dawson, where there are people who've made it and made it quite well. But what does that, what does that mean, and what do you lose in doing so? So it's, this, it's dealing with the successes of the civil rights movement and its limitations, which is very much, of the moment, or even, the late 60s and 70s, right?
Yeah.
And how do you mediate that, right? How do you struggle through it? And the answer, it seems to be full-throated revolution without ambiguity.
Yeah, I mean it's right there in the text of this one. Like, this is what we're doing. This is how it's going to work.
And and ultimately him and Dawson. I mean, how do you read like the final scene with him and Dawson? Spoilers ahead.
Yeah, spoilers there. I mean, I didn't see it coming the way that it plays out, because I think it's also the way that Lawrence Cook, who plays Dan Freeman, the main character here, the spy, the guerrilla army organizer, I didn't really see it coming that he was like, I didn't feel like they were setting up dramatically like, oh, he's going to have to take this guy out. He does say that he's trying to recruit him at a certain point, and I was like, I'm not buying the way this character is presented. The cop now, the police officer, I'm not buying him as being recruitable, because if he went through, presumably because what he talks about going to LA to do the gang warfare, whatever training, this is a reaction to Chicago 68 and the DNC and Mayor Daley and all the troops and the protests there, and the police riot that happened outside the DNC location. This guy then goes and teaches those tactics to people in LA. This is not a cop who's going to like come on over to your side just because you're the same skin color. He's not invested in it the way that Freeman is. I didn't think.
Well,
so I was like, well, that's cool there. And so I didn't think that was very well set up dramatically to me. So when Freeman has to kill Dawson, I was like, oh, I was a little shocked that like, oh, okay, we're going this route. I mean, I guess that narratively makes sense, but I didn't think that to me didn't it wasn't set up to have really strong emotional payoff the way I think it should have to me.
I mean, I think, Freeman, his ex, and Dawson, all people who come from a particular background who made it out, represent a particular class. And I think I was saying, like, it feels like they represent sort of a nascent new Black elite that's coming out of the civil rights movement, that sort of benefit from that movement, and even sort of the Black Power moment. But it's limited, and tokenism is like very clear. And I think we talk about the later scene with his ex toward the end, where he sort of tips the hat. And so like that's part of the struggle, is will these people take the skill that they've learned to help liberate, or will they will continue to buy into? And I think so Dawson is portrayed in some ways so sympathetically for somebody who's like not gone along with this. I think, ultimately, it ends with them having a struggle, and he kills Dawson. Dawson shoots him. It's not clear he's going to survive, actually. He's sort of hiding his injuries, and then he tells his chief lieutenants, you have to be willing to kill Black people.
Right.
You have to be willing to do what's necessary. And then, images of ongoing guerrilla warfare, in the movie ends. And this is where, I think the connection to Uptight, because Uptight is dealing with, to a certain degree, the reality of what the sort of borrowing from third world guerrilla tactics. This is where what the implications of this actually are.
Right.
And I is there a critique of his path in this? I don't think so, but it's certainly like not running away from the difficult implications of this. I mean, they point out like of the military unit that's there, 40% are black, and sure, we want to recruit them, but also you're going to have to shoot some of them. And it's running into that political thing. The difference with Uptight, there's a lot of differences with Uptight, but in Uptight, part of it is the guerrilla warfare is not going to happen, right? Like you're actually at a moment of difficulty. It feels like a cry of despair. Whereas in this, it actually has a real chance of working. And so, is it worth it under these conditions?
Right. Well, yeah, it's interesting because even Uptight, the opening scene in Uptight is they're trying to get guns to arm the revolution on the eve of MLK being assassinated. And then this one, you have the same scene almost, which I was like, oh my God, this is really giving me some Uptight vibes, where they do get a bunch of guns and are like passing them out.
Whereas in this one, they've all been trained in CIA techniques and are like,
right. So that the discipline is there, and
the discipline is there. I mean, this is part of it. It is the portrayal of racism satirically is very powerful. In reality, groups like this get infiltrated, and which is, of course, what they plan to do. The CIA plans to do it. They didn't know it was there. But, part of it is the level of military tightness and discipline is at the level of, an armed cell, which I don't think any actual movements ever, made it to. Organizations like the Black Panthers are riddled with informants. And it's, the idea of, the Chicago Police Department, which actually is going to have intelligence units operating in the Black community, right? They're going to be looking for organizations for Black militancy. That's like their number one fear, probably in this period. It's like, okay, like we're going to leave that aside. We're going to say that his tradecraft is so good and the discipline of his groups that no one figures out what's going on at all, that you've got them hanging out in the, whatever. And that the CIA is like kind of watching him too. We'll just ignore all that. But because it worked.
I think you put it into the narrative pretty skillfully here, where it's like, okay, let's because you have movies like Uptight, or you have like Robert Kramer's Ice from 1970. And it's kind of about the struggle within a group who are trying to kick off a guerrilla attack, versus this one is like, okay, let's just say we can do it. What would be a fictionalized version of that? And, the CIA is watching him, like you said, like they're watching Freeman very closely, but since he has that perfect guise of like, oh no, I'm just a social worker. Of course I'm meeting with all these underprivileged youth because this is my job right now. Meanwhile, you're not really paying attention to what he's doing. Otherwise, like one bug, audio bug the office, and you'd hear what's actually going on.
Right.
But I like that all that is sort of put aside to explore like, well, what if this was actually able to happen? Right. What if you apply these CIA tactics to a movement like this?
So can we deal with the fact that this is actually the plot of Marvel's Black Panther? So because Killmonger, the villain, is basically someone who learned his trade in subverting other countries from the U.S. government and then applies it to Wakanda. I don't think that's a coincidence. I do not think that's a coincidence. I don't think it's a coincidence at all.
But also that's the bad guy. And here, like your protagonist, the one you're cheering for. I mean, some people cheer for Killmonger because it's Michael B. Jordan. He's awesome. But your protagonist here that you're cheering on is not using it for nefarious reasons.
Right. And
from an audience perspective, I guess.
From an audience perspective, from the film perspective, it's not for nefarious reasons. It is.
Well, unless you're the FBI, look at this movie in the 70s, but we'll get there in a minute.
We'll get there in a moment. I'd like to deal with gender real quick in this movie.
Sure.
So the backbone of all social movements is women and femme. That includes, like, let's say the Black Panthers and so forth. I mean, and also figures like Angela Davis do exist. And women have no role in this guerrilla struggle whatsoever. They are not there. The only women portrayed is his sellout girlfriend, who is shown to have ambiguities, right? Like when she tells Dawson that she's figured out that Freeman is involved. She says, am I doing the right thing? Right. She has some level of ambiguity. And then the prostitute, who ends up being a double agent for him with the CIA. But nonetheless, basically, women don't play a role in this. This is a very masculine movie, which does not actually portray how a movement like this could. That's the most unrealistic thing in this movie, frankly, is that you could possibly ever do this without women's involvement. As you know, it's just not happening. So, but I think that speaks to like male filmmakers just not even thinking about it, and sort of the issues within not just Black Power movement, not just sort of Black liberation movements, but movements in general in that period. There's a reason why Black feminism and you know, feminist upsurges happen out of this, and a lot of it is reacting to the fact that like they're supposed to do secretarial work and coffee and shit,
or be the prostitute who's, you know, feeding information or Yeah, because I looked up just to see what the timeline was, because I was like, you can't be unaware of the role of women, but specifically within the story you're telling right here, and doing a guerrilla group in Chicago. So I looked at the dates because I was like, you know, Angela Davis came to mind obviously right away. 1970s, when the infamous, you know, FBI Most Wanted poster goes out, and her trial is in 72 when this movie is being made and comes out.
Yeah, I mean, it's a reflection of.
It's really a missed opportunity for, and again, I started reading the book, Sam Greenlee's book that this is based on, and I only got maybe like a fourth of the way into it, but it wasn't like I was seeing it there and they cut it out for the movie. I think it might just be like you said, it was just didn't think of it.
Well, it's the, you know, it's a reflection of the issues going on at the time. Like,
yeah,
there's a reason feminist movements come up at this point, because this is, you know, because there's movement sexism, and there's going to be among radical writers and directors, there's going to be sexism where they just don't think of it, or, you know, women are whores or traitors.
Well, even within, I've watched those Black Panther documentaries as well, and there's like plenty of documented accusations of like, you guys, can we also not be sexist while we're being a revolutionary organization?
Yeah.
Oh, we're still gonna be sexist. Okay.
Yeah, this is the struggle, right?
Yeah.
So that's it. That, I mean, but that in itself is an interesting document of its time. So yeah, I don't know. So like, I mean, to me, like this, you know, that's the politics of it.
Well, to feed into the politics of it, I didn't know much about Sam Greenlee, who, I mean, the story starts with him. He wrote the book, he produces the film, he's a co-writer on the screenplay for it. From what I could tell, he was around the filming of the movie. He has plenty of interviews you can find with him on YouTube while he was still alive, as this film got discovered. Actually, I guess we could just mention that as well too. The film itself was found, print of it was found in a vault in 2011 under a different name. So that speaks to, we don't want this. Someone at some point labeled it like, we don't need this movie to be found. I don't know why you don't just burn it or chuck it in the garbage at that point, but let's mislabel it and stick it in a vault somewhere. Fine. So it gets found in 2011. And within 1 year, in 2012, it's in the National Film Registry of the Library of Congress. So it's recognized immediately as being an important film. But like I said, where does this film come from? But then also, how was it greeted when it came out, were two thoughts I wanted to take a look at as I was diving into this here. So you don't have a movie without the book. So let's, you know, Sam Greenlee first here is the author. He's a screenwriter. He's a co-producer. His, what do you call it? Like, his resume was really fascinating to me. And you can almost see like, methinks this may be autobiographical to a certain extent, I would say. Undergraduate in political science, 1948 to 1952, went to University of Wisconsin, was also a track star, I guess, of some renown. And then in 52 to 54, he joins the Army. Interesting time period to join the Army. In 54, he gets his master's in international relations from the University of Chicago. Again, he's a Chicago guy, so there you go. He's back home. But then in 57 to 65, he joins USIA as presumably someone who's in the Army as well. He's one of their first Black officials. He worked in Iraq, Pakistan, Indonesia, and Greece, and was in Baghdad during the 1958 coup. After his USIA stint was over, he lived in Greece for 3 years, where he started writing The Spook Who Sat by the Door.
Wait, he was in Baghdad?
Yeah.
During the 58?
Yes. As a USIA employee.
Okay. Oh, the 58 coup. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. That's not CIA. The 63 coup
is it?
It's not. It's the alignment of Qassam is not oriented toward the US. The CIA helps. It's not clear to the degree to which they're actually important. They help the Ba'ath Party gain power in 63 over the guy who takes over in 58.
58. Okay.
And then there's a counter coup against the Ba'ath, and they lose out, and then they take power again in 68. Anyway, sorry.
Well, but also the United States Information Agency, as far as I've read officially, is a State Department arm of the State Department, right? So it's not like he's not in the CIA. He's Army and then United States Information Agency operative, I guess.
I mean, is that the State Department's intelligence arm?
Yeah, it's the USA's is State Department. So it's not like Greenlee was like, I was in the CIA, but like he's around
CIA
the
agents
apparatus. Yeah, exactly. So, but then I think that gives you good fodder though, where you're like, okay, I kind of I kind of know this system here. And then, in a flight of fancy, you're like, wait, what if we just took this? And he's clearly seen what's going on in his hometown, Chicago. Granted, he's in Greece in like would it be like 60? He'd be in Greece in like the mid to late 60s. So he's not necessarily even in Chicago during like the 68 DNC events or anything like that, but he's clearly aware of them, and then returns to Chicago. Actually, gets the book published through a British publishing arm, publishing company, because the U.S. publishing world was like, we're not publishing this book. This is like an instruction manual for an insurrection.
I mean, there's the Greek junta, right-wing junta, takes over in 67. So he sees a lot of coup stuff.
Oh, so that timeline, you're right. Yeah.
Right. Also, part of in embassies, the cover for CIA, there's always going to be CIA people in a major American embassy at least, and their cover is going to be State Department.
Oh, sure. Okay. I just meant, so like, even if he's not himself a CIA agent, he's around the world of international spycraft more than you and I ever will be.
No, I mean, he's directly involved. And in fact, maybe he was CIA. It's not clear. I mean, probably not. But what I mean is that with that background, it's actually not possible that he spent time. But part of it is he's seen their culture, right?
That's what it is. Yeah, exactly.
And
so he's published, and it's pretty immediately thought like, oh, we should make this into a movie. And like I said, Sam Greenlee's official credits are co-writer and producer of The Spook Who Sat by the Door. And then I was just sort of curious that, okay, this movie comes out. It's really hard to find any real information on how much made at the box office, or was it, a hit in certain areas? Like, what's going on here? How was it released? Because of this quote I found, or actually this clip I found from, this is Sam Greenlee being interviewed about like how it played in theaters, how it was pulled from theaters, and the support or lack thereof he got at the time that this movie came out. Again, this is 1973 Hollywood.
We started getting reports that exhibitors were being visited by FBI agents in an attempt to convince them of the danger of this film. In some cases, the film would open on Friday and close on Sunday. It was on the market, hit and miss, from Labor Day weekend 1973 until February of 74. That's when a delegation of the FBI met with the distributors, United Artists, who were not the producers. Ivan and I were co-producers. And they shut it down in February of 74.
And Black Hollywood didn't rally behind you? Black Hollywood didn't try to support you?
Hell no.
Wow, man. What's wrong with black folks, man?
Come on, man. They didn't get to be making movies in Hollywood by doing the kind of stuff I do.
Which is, which is his line on it, but yeah.
Yeah. Not terribly surprising, but then also it speaks to the, I don't know, like the hide this movie thing of like, you label it with the wrong title, stick it in a vault somewhere, and it doesn't get discovered till decades and decades later.
Yeah. So could I just say something more about his? I mean, part of it is that Freeman is him, right?
Yes.
I mean, in the Army around the same time as Korea, it goes in the CIA. This person goes to the State Department. Frankly, I'm curious about that. His second book from 76 is Baghdad Blues, about basically about a black person in the U.S. embassy during the 1968 revolution and or coup. It depends on your perspective. Certainly, most, I think, I can't speak for Iraqis, but like I think a lot, it's referred to as a revolution more often than not.
Yeah.
The 1968 revolution, and sort of talking about sort of like, this is what he's playing off of this particular experience. I mean, it's his work is semi autobiographical, but then keeps going, right? And it is something. It is something to make yourself a character like Freeman, actually.
Yeah, it's got to be pretty fun, I would think. Like it's
yes,
taking what you know and then just like having a fun fictional time. Like, where would this go if we did this? And you're like, well, you know what you're talking about, so all of this makes perfect sense.
I mean, also, I mean, he's along with another novel. He also, in 1990, he became the poet laureate of Chicago. Like he ends up being a prominent artist.
Yeah, yeah. And I didn't mean anything negative connotation wise with like anything with his career, because I've not consumed more than like a fourth or so, a third or a fourth of one of his books. It's really just a reading of looking at some basic biography of him and then seeing, at least in this movie, The Spook Who Sat by the Door. I don't know, you can sort of see like real world experience through a novelist's eyes onto the page. Here's the story we want to tell.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, it's just the biography is so strong in this.
There is a couple other aspects as I was digging into the production of this movie that I thought were kind of interesting that I'll just kind of mention real quick. So we mentioned Ivan Dixon being the producer. He's not listed as one of the written by, but I assume being the kind of director that he seems to be. I'm sure he's around the screenplay, he's working on characters and stuff. So he's producer and he's director here with this film. He came off of previously directing Trouble Man in '72, which we already kind of mentioned, but he also pulled in folks that he had already worked with. So if he had continued making feature films instead of going into the TV route, I think he probably was kind of putting together his own little group here. Because like Lawrence Cook, the star of this one, was also in Trouble Man. He was also in Cotton Comes to Harlem. Guy playing Dan Freeman here. We mentioned there's a Herbie Hancock score here, which again is a little bit more jazzy than funk, but still has some slight funk element to it, I think, here.
Mm-hmm.
He also has two editors that he worked with on this one. Thomas Pennick, who would also work with Charles Burnett on My Brother's Wedding and with Gordon Parks on Leadbelly. And then he also has Michael Kahn in here as one of the editors on Spook Who Sat by the Door, who he even did I think his first movie was a porn movie, like a straight up 70s, like adult XXX movie. Then he went into some blaxploitation editing, and since Close Encounters of the Third Kind has been Steven Spielberg's editor. So you actually have a career there as an editor that goes from porn to Spielberg, which is kind of an interesting route, all the way up to the new West Side Story remake. He was the editor there. So it feels like behind the camera, if he would have kept going with feature films out in theaters, that would have been an interesting group to kind of collaborate with over the years and put together some interesting movies. Although I don't know, maybe the experience of, as Sam Greenlee just described, with like trying to get this movie out, trying to maybe make a return on investment, they produced it themselves. Maybe it's just like, fuck this noise, I'm just going to do some TV gigs. Like,
Yeah, it's not, I mean, like part of it is, could he, like, I mean, I don't know how Trouble Man did. This didn't do very well. Like, what's your...
Well, I also don't think this one had a chance to do well either.
Right.
So who knows? Would it have caught on if it was out there? I don't know. I could kind of see it catching on, but maybe not. Maybe that's just wishful thinking on my part.
It's interesting having, I mean, this is, the FBI sort of suppression. We ran into some of this with Uptight.
Yeah.
It feels very sort of, these are, tactics they'd used 15 years earlier, whether during the McCarthy era of sort of, and had previously and would continue to. But yeah, I mean, this is a movie that's walking right into an open political fight.
Yeah.
And unlike a lot of its contemporaries, it doesn't glance that off, right? It plays itself as a direct commentary and inspiration for that.
Right. Yeah, speaking directly to that, there's even a movie from a couple years earlier, in 1969, that Sidney Poitier did, where it's one of the few movies where Poitier, he plays a black militant who is robbing a factory on their finance day. He's robbing payroll in order to fund the revolutionary struggle and basically do what the plot of this movie is. But it gets bogged down in the dynamics of a heist gone wrong with a crew of people, but also uses like exactly zero terminology of the time period to be just this sort of like no real teeth kind of approach of like, we're saying things like revolutionary struggle. And I feel like I haven't seen the movie in a few years, but like, I don't even think the words like Black Power are mentioned, or like there's nothing referencing anything that would tangibly connect you to the society in which it's taking place in 1969. Whereas this one is directly saying that over and over again and showing people ideally like a very simplistic, but a way like, here's how you can organize this as well.
I mean, apparently, the Symbionese Liberation Army, right? That, famously, kidnapped Patty Hearst and all this.
Yeah, yeah.
In part modeled themselves off of at least the book and the film. So like it's directly having those influences. I think it's interesting that this movie doesn't say Black Power. It actually doesn't use the language of then movements. And I think, that in a certain sense, I mean, it's I don't know Greenlee's integration into it, but I felt like, it's about somebody who actually doesn't totally come. It's not about a young person, right? It's about actually somebody who's in their early middle age, and written by and in both the director and the writer are as well. And I actually feel, and its main characters are either the younger gang members who would come from that generation, coming up right then, or Freeman's contemporaries. And so it's the generational politics, both in how the politics is portrayed. I don't know if I can tease, we can tease all that out, but there is something there, right? Like it's not, it's speaking to the moment, but it's also not in the moment.
Yeah. It's not really using the language of the moment.
Not the language of the,
I hadn't really thought about that.
It's like a parallel. It makes no reference to any other, that there's other movements or things going on. You just have a disorganized gang.
Yeah.
With these sorts of beliefs in politics that you can then mold, right? Everybody wants to automatically fight Whitey, so they do. But like there's an alternate reality bit to this.
Yeah, I think the alternate reality is exactly the way to put it, because it to me is more like that's why it works as social satire more than it does like drama, action, war, whatever the other genres were. It was like, no, it's social satire. Just even like that opening clip we played where they're talking about all the data shit that all the numbers they had to crunch to figure out that you're going to lose by 1.84%. We were like, this is comical. Like this is, it all along the way. It's like, it's kind of heightened just enough to me to be social satire. But also I think keeping it, if you did start using like, Black Panthers or Black Power, any of the terminology, like it would, maybe that would have grounded it in a different way too. Just be a different tone, but I think it helped it read more of social satire to me because maybe because it was lacking some of the specificity of the era. So we'd mentioned earlier on in the episode, Bill Duke. He's a fan of this film. We are a fan of Bill Duke's. And when this film was found, the print was found in 2001, finally put out on some home video in 2012-13. The folks over at Trailers from Hell interviewed Bill Duke about something, and he mentioned, Spook Who Sat by the Door being one of his favorite films. So they interviewed him for a couple of minutes about that. But I thought it was interesting in the era of Bill Duke being interviewed about this film, the reverberations that this film can have through the years, or if you're just watching it now with contemporary eyes. At the time of Bill Duke's interview, he references the role of the Iraq War on a certain neighborhood of this policeman he's going to talk about here.
It's very similar to a friend of mine who is on the police force who said he's really worried about a lot of these young gang members who are now in Iraq and they're coming back in gangs with training. And the police departments around the country are a little nervous. It's not just a kid with a gun. These kids know how to launch grenades, do all kinds of stuff. And he says that we have not seen the impact of that yet. So it's really interesting, the parallels between those two. This film right here was, every time I watch it, I say, how in the name of God did they get that made?
With you right there, Bill, but that's just kind of interesting. I mean, obviously in the 2023 world, this is the first time I was hearing of that being like a worry from police departments, but obviously I don't have the mind of a cop, so that wouldn't have occurred to me, but that is interesting.
So to me, what the irony of it is, and it says something about, the views of how the shapes of the threat, basically the threats that cops see in
Right.
general are in many ways follow from a direct line from the period of Spook, of Spook who sat by the door, right? Which is
Mhm.
not surprising at all, because I think the danger that actually came out of Iraq vets was the very intentional entering of white supremacists who, you know, into the infantry corps to gain training out of the Iraq War and the Afghan War. Like that's what's turned out to be the actual massive security threat. But of course,
Yeah.
they're going to worry about black gang members. That's the image in their head. That's the threat.
Right. Meanwhile, you're missing the whole thread and experience of a Timothy McVeigh or Terry Nichols, leading up to Oklahoma City. We're like, oh, a lot of interesting military background here, let alone like the explosion of like the militia movement in the I would say like late 90s, I guess, early 2000s. But yeah, you're completely missing the forest for the trees and your paranoia there.
Right.
Cops. Way to go. Way to go. So Isaac, as we're wrapping up here, is this a leftist film?
Oh, damn. Oh.
As we've been kind of discussing, when really like ripe political content comes up in some of the films we're watching, not everyone is, but this one, I definitely feel like we needed to check in and see, is this a leftist
film? And me, there's been times where I felt very confident in my arbitration of these questions. Woo. I certainly, it deals with concerns of the left. It's hardly an anti-leftist film.
True.
Though nationalist movements have not always been, you can have left nationalist movements and they're not always, this is socioeconomic concerns, but they're wrapped into a racial lens, though it deals with class. I think it sort of deftly deals with class dynamics and class formation within the Black community in this very, complicated moment. It's certainly a movie that leftists can enjoy and find themes in. I don't know if I would call it exactly leftist. I mean, certainly in a libertarian, it's hard on this sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
It's hard when it's so divorced from existing movements.
Right.
And so the program is certainly one of national liberation that most leftists might agree with, whether they agree with the tactics or a program of creating a separate nation. But certainly, the underlying drives, and that's why I think this is a movie I'd show in leftist spaces and for interest. But are the creators doing it from a specifically leftist perspective? Certainly, there isn't socioeconomic issues that sort of usually with the left is like, it's not that socioeconomic issues should trump, but certainly they should combine in there, right?
Right.
Into sort of the perspective of the film. It's certainly critical of American empire and its apparatus. Yeah, no, I mean, it's a movie that plays into every key left critique. Is it openly leftist in itself? I'm not so sure, right? Like, is it a movie about the Panthers, let's say, right? Which would be, a very left organization. Like, is it openly anti-capitalist in its politics, right? Does it take that direction and tie that to Black liberation? I don't think it necessarily does completely.
Not overtly, but I feel like it's one of those you can kind of read between the lines of some of like the youth that they're part of the gang, and some of the speeches that he gives to the kids to kind of rally the troops, as it were.
It's that those themes, those underlying themes of
around,
are there. But part of the question is does national liberation lead to, right? And it deals with it does not deal with the thorny issue. It deals with the thorny issue of class formation. I say formation because these are Black people taking opportunities that have been created by the waves of social movements to join new niches within the elite that have been created. But it doesn't necessarily deal with those dynamics after the revolution, which is not really a fair thing to ask of the film. Close enough. But I don't
Right,
know if I don't know if they're the broad concerns of left-wing politics, right? Not any particular movement are ambient in this, but also the concerns of Black nationalist movements and so forth, which may be associated with the left and may not always be. Certainly, we're not talking about a Panther style program or like, something like that.
right, right.
There's
It's
nothing.
close,
There,
but it's not.
there's
But it's not.
no. There's no even pseudo Marxist language used in this.
Mm-mm.
So I mean, I think it's a film that leftists should see. I would say
And
that.
I consider myself, a leftist, and I enjoyed the movie. It would be a real fun time with a group of people. I watched it, again from like being, pulled by United Artists, sitting in a vault for decades because it's potentially too dangerous to be seen, to like it's free on YouTube, 50 years later. I think it would be really fascinating to watch this with a group, and I think the social satire would really hit and be very enjoyable with the group situation. That said, overall, though, I have to be honest, I felt like this movie played from a film perspective like a really good TV movie of the time.
Interesting. Wow, we haven't really talked about qualities. We haven't really talked about our assessment.
It wasn't as like dynamic and interesting from like a filmmaking point of view. I don't think it's bad at all, but it didn't have what I would want from the era, which would be like a lot of formal experimentation with how movies are put together or how you're telling a story that you get in a lot of the 70s stuff. My example would be if the whole film had the chops of the radio station hijacking. At one point, they hijack a radio station. They issue an audio communique through the radio station while it's intercut with the bombing of the mayor's office, is what the communique is talking about. There's like a 3 or 4 level narrative going on within that edited sequence where I was like, yeah, okay, this is really dynamic filmmaking here. This is really fascinating. Now we're talking. And a lot of the other scenes to me were like, they're fine. But, it's like, that's what makes it like it's solid 3-star movie to me versus like, whoa, that you would get with like an Uptight or Ice or something else that has a little bit more of a dynamic filmmaking language that it's using to tell the story. That said, though, like you mentioned, the stellar central performance that we get from Lawrence Cook as Dan Freeman is interesting because I really wasn't digging it for the first 25, 30 minutes, but he's playing the role of like the token CIA guy. And there's not much to it because he's not allowing himself to have any kind of personality at all. And like you said, once he gets to Chicago and he starts playing like the dual roles, it's all in like the little tiny facial expressions and what he's doing there. And I was like, oh, okay, this is fascinating now.
I mean, I think so. For me, I hate rating systems, but like this is, I mean, part of it is that elevates it, right? I mean, you're right with the filmmaking language. I also like, and I'm not as good with this sort of thing. I like the way some of the guerrilla scenes are handled, right?
Okay.
But I think it's also because I just sort of didn't expect to have that level of, like, I didn't actually expect them to film that, right? Like, do they have the budget to do a full on? But there's things about the ways those are shot that I like. I mean, certainly it's not like super dynamic or something. I see what you mean. I mean, we talked about budget and sort of it looking more than it is, but ultimately, like, it's a very low budget movie, and they're not, in the wheel. I mean, I think for me, it has a much higher rating because of the central performances and the use of the themes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I think that it works quite. The filmmaking works quite well at all those levels. Yes, it could be the craft could be a bit higher. I think it's well edited. But so yeah, no, I would tend to put it a little bit higher than that. It's interesting. We prioritize different things.
That's true. That's what makes our dynamic work so well.
Yeah, it's why you have a podcast in which we're not actually the same person.
Right. So that said, Isaac, what have we got in front of us as we continue looking at Black cinema here in February and March?
Well, we're going to actually stay in the 70s. We're going to be covering Welcome Home, Brother Charles by Jama Fanaka from 1975, which is a movie that you saw years ago and I have not seen yet, and I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah, I dove in with when we were doing some Charles Burnett like early exploration there, and the LA Rebellion. I was like, wait, what is this? This sounds right up my alley. And then dove in with Yama Fanaka and Burnett and that whole crew. And Welcome on Brother Charles was definitely one of those. Wow, I'm adding this to our docket. We're getting to this one eventually.
I mean, what's the relationship between this and the LA, the LA Rebellion wave?
I mean, Fanaka's part of that.
Fanaka is part of that.
Yeah. So yeah,
okay.
He's in there.
So we'll talk more about that next episode.
Absolutely. But before we sign off, be sure to rate and review the show in whatever podcast app you are currently using. And if you do enjoy the show, tell a friend or two about it. Now, if you also love the show and you feel so inclined, we also have a Patreon page set up. So see all the links in the show notes for all of that information. And until next time, I am Aaron.
And I'm Isaac. And stay safe out there, especially to everybody involved in the struggle in Atlanta and over, the building of the new cop factory training center, which, people have been killed. The National Guard is being talked about. And obviously we've also had a horrific, another horrific video of police violence. And, the National Guard may get involved in Georgia. We're going to see. So that, things are popping off because basically as long as the police and the justice system and the prison system that we have today is not abolished, because it cannot be reformed, right? It has to be It's got to go. As long as that happens, this will not go away, right? 2020, the legacy of 2020 is very hard, of the uprising in 2020 is very hard to settle because so many people involved. And yet, in some ways, the consensus seemed to come to a reactionariness. And I don't, in some ways I'm not in touch with movements enough to understand, but it also put abolition, I think, more centrally in the program of movements everywhere. Not that it hadn't been really important before, but it hadn't been up front as widely, right? It had been something that had been pushed, and then the uprising made it more core, I think. I mean, certainly for a lot of white leftists that I know, certainly it's like, oh well, this is that it created a new consensus around that's what we have to do, and that struggle isn't going to go away as long as we live with this system. So stay safe for everybody there fighting for liberation.